Well, good morning. Welcome to the Digging Deeper podcast. We are so excited that y'all are here. If you've never tuned in before and don't know what we're doing, we are doing this podcast where we dig into that week's sermon to dig a little bit deeper into it and figure out how we can find ways to dig a little bit deeper into our heart through application. And so we are glad that you're here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Brown. I am the associate pastor here.
My name is Jacob Belding. I'm the connections minister here at First Baptist Hazel in Hazel, Texas.
In Hazel, Texas, just in case anyone's listening outside of Hazel, Texas.
Yeah. As if Hazel wasn't enough, First Baptist Hazel.
Yeah, but just in case someone from Uganda is tuning in, welcome. Anyways, Jude is not here. He's being lazy again. And so it's just me and Jacob. But we can just dive right into it. We got no internet here at the church, and so we're pre-recording this instead of doing it live like normal. But I got to preach this week. And you know what that means, Jacob?
I'm doing the recap.
That means you're doing the recap. All right.
Yeah. So the sermon was called Words Matter. I wrote it down too.
Okay, good.
And there were 3 overall points, or rather reasons why our words matter. And first is our words reveal the state of our hearts. Our words affect those who hear them. And our words impact how others view God. Boom. 100%.
I guess. That is the outline. So
Yes.
so I can't knock you. That is technically the outline, as always. Just need some more pizzazz to it.
You're right. Yeah, so it was all based on, or based primarily on James 3. I won't say it's all based on James 3, because we were actually quite a bit all over the Bible.
Yeah, I didn't realize. So I normally, I'll write the sermon, and then I'll go back and make the slides for it. Mm-hmm. And when I was making the slides, I was like, there's a lot of verses that's being thrown out here.
It was good. And whenever, you're sitting in service and, it's like, okay, this is just like in, Obadiah, whatever. It's like, oh man, let me flip over there real quick. And
well, okay. Let's side tangent for a second.
I've opened something up.
Well, there's always the thought of, okay, should we have our physical Bibles or should we use multimedia? We put all of our verses on the screens, and there's a real trade-off to that. Mm-hmm. So like on the pro side of throwing the verses on the screen, it allows everyone to see the verse in the same translation that the pastor's using. It allows for like a streamlined effect, because like if you're doing multiple verses, every time you say a verse, you gotta wait like a minute for everyone to get there. So it streamlines things. If someone doesn't have a Bible, they're able to still follow along. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but hearing someone read something and reading something with them is like drastically different for me.
Big time.
I will take in a lot more if I'm reading it along with them. So that's the pros. The downside is the cons. It tacitly encourages people to not bring their Bibles,
right,
and to not use their Bibles. And I struggle with that a little bit, because I do want people to use their Bibles, even if it's on their phones or on their tablets, just to get into the rhythm of personally looking for those things. I mean, that's how. I'm sure you're the same. We didn't have multimedia growing up, and that's how largely we learned where the Bible books are in the Bible. Is like figuring out. They say Obadiah, and you're like, is that New Testament or Old Testament?
Better look at the table of contents and get a page number to help myself out. And growing up, it was always a drag. I know it's like a cliche, but yes, turn to Obadiah chapter or whatever. And then he starts pretty quick. It's like, wait, you have to wait on those. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let everyone find it first.
And so generally, I guess what we kind of do here is, you have like your main passage, and we encourage people to turn to that passage. And then any referencing passages, we're not going to expect people to turn to all those. That they'll be on the screen. Yeah. And then they can note it down if they want. Someone to note it down or to look at later.
Yeah. Well, they can be handy a lot of the time. Like the first passage was James 3 through 5, the first part of 5. And then, if you're just limited to the screen, if you didn't bring your Bible or didn't look at your Bible, then you wouldn't kind of have an idea of what the surrounding verses look like, and what comes before that, what comes after that, and how might that contribute and fit. Or like, I think it was Proverbs 10, the Proverbs 10 passage that you had. I was looking through Proverbs 10, and there's a lot in there about speaking and almost said speaking in tongues.
Speaking and
using your tongue and those kinds of things. And so it was a pretty rich proverb.
Proverbs has a lot to say about how we talk.
Oh yeah, it's like that whole chapter, man. And so it's like, but if you're not following along in your Bible at all, then you miss out on that a little bit.
Yeah, and so there's for sure a fine line. I see the pros and cons of it.
Yeah.
But the pro is that how many verses did I use on Sunday? I don't know. If we count the passage as one verse or one passage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 separate passages.
I had 8, but it could be going back to with James 3.
I counted James as one whole passage.
Yep.
But if you count going back and forth between James, we're at 8, 9, 10-ish. And God, you spend half your sermon just waiting for people to turn. Right. Anyways.
Bible drills.
And so there's pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the sermon. Anyways.
Side note, like you said.
Yeah.
So I liked the opening illustration with NASA and the Challenger disaster, how it's just one little O-ring is all it takes. And then, right, it led to, destruction. Obviously, the astronauts and the teacher all, lost their lives because how was it, a quarter-inch?
Yeah, quarter-inch O-ring.
Quarter-inch O-ring.
Failed. I was talking to Pastor Lee. There's a member of our church that worked on that O-ring. Did you know that?
I did not.
He was on the team that worked on that O-ring. And I mentioned this. So there's lots of stuff that you could dig into in that Challenger event. And I briefly mentioned that those O-rings were not designed to work at temperatures that low. I didn't get into all the discovery and things that they found, but what they did find is that the team, the engineers that worked on it, knew that those O-rings would not function at temperatures that low, and they told them they would not function at temperatures that low. However, they had already delayed and postponed it multiple times, and so because of PR and political pressures, they just pushed right on through against the advisement of the engineers who made the thing. And just you see what happened. There's a whole illustration in itself there. But I do want to clarify that while it was the failure of the O-ring, it wasn't necessarily the failure of the engineers that made the O-ring, because they told them this is not going to operate as we intended it to operate.
Right.
And they said, who cares? We're going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
And people died.
Yeah.
Which is why they probably had a congressional hearing to investigate.
Yeah, they probably needed to have one.
Probably need to. I think that was a good, because you had the space race exploration stuff, and then it was so much political leaning into it to push this, that it kind of caused America and NASA to not slow down and make sure they were doing things well, which led to things like this. And so I think this event with the Challenger caused NASA and America to just take a step back and say, maybe we should not get ahead of ourselves in this. And that's kind of what they did. They did take a step back after that and regroup.
Yeah, and then what was the other one? The Columbia? That was the one that...
It was like 2003, I think.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Actually, I didn't watch that one, weirdly enough.
I didn't watch it either, but I remember I think it was like we didn't have school that day, so I was at home, and I remember the sound, and it sounded like a car door slammed real loud or something.
You could hear it?
Yeah.
Because it was in Houston?
Uh-huh.
I don't remember it at all. I didn't even know until I was like researching this week. I didn't even know that one happened in 2003.
Yeah, and that one, just a little piece from the very top fell off and nicked like one of the tiles or whatever, or made it to where the hole didn't have the integrity that it needed to withstand hot temperatures and things like that. And so just that one little piece fell off. You get a little crack in the sort of armor of the hole, and then that's all it took. Kind of like the O-ring. It's just one little thing, and then disaster.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole.
Just like the tongue.
That's the whole purpose of that illustration, was to show how something so small and seemingly insignificant can actually affect and destroy the whole thing, which is what James is getting at here in this passage. You want to read the passage?
Yes. James 3, starting in verse 3. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. And that's where you started anyway.
That's where, that's what
with that chunk
kicked it off. But yeah, no, the tongue and what we say is such a huge part, such a small physical part, but such a huge part of our lives. And I think James is just trying to beat into us that what you say does matter. Yeah, that reveals a lot about you.
I thought it was interesting. The number of words a day that people on average speak, between 6,000 and 16,000, if I remember right.
Yeah, there's a spread. I found one that said that women speak more than men, then I found another one that said that there's no significant evidence that women do speak more than men. So you know how studies are.
I don't know who came out with that one.
Yeah.
A woman?
Yeah, right. Yeah, studies are such a spread, which is why I generally, I'm not a statistician, and so I'm not digging into all of the ways they conduct the study, and so I generally just try to find an average among them for a safe bet. Which is good. And then I did like how the average book has 80,000 words. And so every 8 days our mouths write a book, which is 3,500 books through the course of our lives. And then the question of what sections are in your library? Yeah.
I liked that. Did you come up with that?
No, it's actually, kind of. So generally how I come up with illustrations, I'll hear someone mention something like that, and then I'll think about more and kind of develop it out a little bit more. And so I was actually reading a commentary about that. I think it's John McGee. It was that older one I got from my great grandpa. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but he mentioned that that the average person speaks, so many words a day. And he said, by the end of your life, you'll have a library of books. And so I thought that was such an interesting concept. And so that's when I started looking into the average word counts, the average book count, to figure out, okay, how many books exactly would it be? It doesn't fill up a whole library. You would think 3,500 books is a library's worth. The average library is like 100,000 books, which is crazy. Yeah, I didn't realize there was that many books.
A small library.
A small personal library. Yeah. For sure. Which, 3,500 books, that's a lot of books.
That's a lot of books.
Most of us read maybe 10 books in our life. So we are producing way more than the average person would probably read.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was an interesting concept. And one to kind of make you sit back and evaluate it. And that's really what I wanted to do with the sermon, is just to cause people to just stop and evaluate what's coming out of your mouth.
Exactly. Yep. So that's where you got into the 3 reasons why our words matter, and the first was that our words reveal the state of our hearts, and then you kind of backed up in James 3 and read verses 1 and 2, talking about teachers. Not many should be teachers because teachers will be held to a higher standard. As teachers of the Bible, right, you have to be careful what you say, how you present God's word, to be sure that we're saying things that are orthodox and in line, not doing heresies and things like that. And
it's always a good thing to not do that.
Yeah, and it ties into the tongue, right? That and thinking about that, it's like there've been a lot of different religions or even Christian heresies, heretical groups that have sprung off of Christianity or developed on their own that really have led so many people astray because of words.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you expand outside of religion,
politics.
Politics. The Jewish Holocaust. While it was like a physical regime, it was an ideological regime that started it. And there's lots of ways, and I don't know if anyone would call Hitler's ideology a Christian religion, but it's certainly he used Christian concepts to funnel his ideology, which would lead into the similar thing of you're taking God and ways commanded, and you're distorting it with your words and leading people astray, which in some cases, like traditional sects of Christianity, lead them to eternal damnation, where in Hitler's case, it led to like a physical Holocaust. And so these things do have an effect, like words really do carry a lot of weight with it.
Just look back at the garden. Genesis 3.
Yeah, so the words are what actually led to the deception and rebellion.
Yep, and ever since we're all born into under the curse of sin, and so like just in those words. I mean, in this case, it's the serpent that spoke them. You're right, not a human, but how many people have been. Their ultimate destination is hell because of that.
But then, is initially the serpent, but then one of the first things they do is start throwing each other under the bus.
Oh yeah,
with their words, and it's funny. Whatever's going on in our heart tends to make its way.
Oh yes,
out of our mouth.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah, sooner or later.
Yeah, I think it's Jordan Peterson. I quote Jordan Peterson too much.
He's fun to listen to.
I think he said something along the lines of, when someone tells you who they are, listen. And so eventually, let someone talk long enough, they will reveal who they are. And when they do, listen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I liked the Luke passage that you mentioned. This is Luke 6. I'm going to back up just a little bit. In 43, I think you read 45.
I was going to do 43 on that, and one of the things I'm always doing is trying to figure out, okay, how much of a passage should I read? So originally I had 43 in there, and the sermon was really long.
Yeah.
And I had so many verses, I was like, okay, maybe I can cut out these verses.
Yeah.
But let's
45 worked. Yeah. It worked but I like the thrust of it.
Yeah, sure.
The illustration's good. So Luke 6:43, for no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. It's like, oh man. Yeah. Like,
and James almost gives a very similar analogy at the end of this passage, where he says, a spring cannot produce both sweet and bitter water. A fig tree can't produce grapes, or a grape tree can't produce figs, something like that. Very similar analogy. I almost wonder if James had this passage
Yeah.
in mind whenever he was writing this.
Yeah, it's likely. But there's also a theme. I mean, it's not only in those two places that you see this concept in Scripture. I mean, it's you wouldn't expect to go and like, oh, I'm going to go find some grapes. We're going to go harvest some grapes, and then you find like a strawberry on the grapevine. That doesn't make any sense at all. Right?
Yeah, it's that old adage. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah.
It's like if you go to an apple tree, what you think is an apple tree, and you're constantly finding oranges. At what point do you start thinking maybe this is an orange tree, not an apple tree? Yeah,
exactly. And growing up, there was definitely a difference. So I grew up in Weatherford. Peaches are a big deal.
Weatherford, Texas, for our international viewers.
Yeah. Which ought to be the peach capital of the world, but some, like Georgia, has that title for some reason. It's dumb. Like Parker County peaches are what you want. And so my grandparents, I can't remember if they planted their peach trees or if they were already there, but every year we would go in the summertime and pick peaches off of the trees, and they were so good. Then at our house, which was right next door, we had a few peach trees that either like never had any peaches on them, or the peaches were just not good. And it's like, we're talking about several hundred yards away. That's it. Maybe 200 yards or 300 yards. One group of trees produces good fruit, and then these others down here don't, for whatever reason. And you just kind of knew that and figured that out after the first or second round. It's like, well, maybe next year will be better, and nope, sure wasn't. It's like, what is wrong with this tree? This tree's not doing what it's supposed to. And so, it's like, what do you expect? Do you expect good fruit from that one on year 3? No. It's like, I'm not even going to try anymore.
Yeah. Well, and all that would even tie back to the greater analogy that Jesus would give throughout his ministry, but primarily in John 15, where he calls us to abide in him. That the only way that you're going to bear good fruit is if you're abiding within Christ. And so, like, pulling it all the way back to the concept of like what your mouth is producing is what's revealing what's growing inside your heart. If your mouth is constantly producing gossip and negativity and arrogance and all these sinful things, then one would eventually start to question what's the source within here. And if the source in here is bad, then one must question what's the source that's leading to that source. Because like if you have Christ that's connected to your life, then your heart source is connected to Christ. So it's like the heart source is getting its source from Christ, which then is producing this out of here. If your heart source is connected to not Christ, to something else, to idolatry or whatever, then that source is going to be rotten, which is going to lead to this. And so so in the tech world, really in any kind of troubleshooting world, you always follow the chain of signal. So like if you were to take your car to the mechanic and something like it's not starting, well, the mechanic in their mind, I'm not a mechanic, I assume the mechanic in their mind is going to follow a signal path of, okay, you need this to do this, 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 to start the car. All right, let's walk through each of those pieces to figure out what's going on. And that same signal path is almost going on with our words. Okay, your words are out of line. Okay, let's follow the signal path to figure out what's going on. Okay, where's your heart at? Okay, now where is it connected to Christ?
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's what's the primary cause? Well, it goes back to the heart and of the person, and are we in Christ? Are we abiding, or are we not? And then that shows itself, whether it's through the tongue or other means as well, right? In our outward lives.
Yeah.
So, all right, cool. So that was the first point. The second was that our words affect those who hear them. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Words will never hurt me.
Yeah. What a stupid statement. I remember being taught that in third, fourth grade, and I guess I get it, but then also, does anyone actually believe that?
Right.
Like legitimately, and like I get the overall concept is, let's say you have someone who's a bully or whatever, and they're just saying mean things. The concept that I think they're trying to teach is, hey, you don't need to listen to them. Like what they say about you doesn't determine who you are, which I agree. But teach that. Right. like if you just teach like broadly, words won't hurt you. That's just not true.
Right.
Like words can hurt. Words can be very destructive.
Yeah.
I would rather, let's come up with a phrase to teach like, your value isn't determined by what people say about you.
Yeah.
Let's find a way to make a phrase around that.
Well, that's the irony. I think that's pretty implicit in that statement. Like if you have to tell yourself, sticks and stones may break my bones, words will never hurt me, then it's implied that words actually can be harmful.
You have to remind yourself that words don't hurt me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So this is where you got into the Chicago Fire of 1871 was a good way to sort of illustrate that, okay, this cow kicked over a lantern.
Do you know the lady that owned the cow? Do you know her name?
Ooh, I don't.
Mrs. O'Leary.
Mrs. O'Leary.
Yeah.
How dare she?
How dare she, man?
Leave that lantern by a cow to be kicked.
Yep.
And then the whole city goes up in flames, basically, over several days, if I remember right.
Yeah, 3 days.
3 days, 3 days. And caused so much destruction, death, chaos, and it's all because of that lantern.
Yeah.
And that cow kicking it over, something so small. And it's the same way with other wildfires too. That one's a famous example because of the magnitude and scale of the destruction. But we were talking about earlier this week about wildfires. Oh yeah, because there was a fire watch or something for Fort Worth and North Texas, and how West Texas the wind is consistently, you get gusts that are pretty strong, pretty high. Like last week, the wind that we had that was like 70-mile-an-hour gusts. Like Sam said, she had a friend that because like the sky was all brown and stuff, right? I'm getting way off track here. The sky's brown, and her friend asked her like, "Well, what does it mean? Like tornadoes. Usually the sky's kind of green colored." What about when it's brown? And Sam's like, it's just dirt. And it's normal in West Texas. But, just a little, like somebody throwing a cigarette out the window or whatever, like all of a sudden there goes 1,000 acres out there. And because the wind just whips that fire around like crazy. It's nuts. Same thing, right? It affects other people.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question here. We didn't have time to get into this too much in the sermon. Let me see. Okay. So verse 5. Let's see. Well, let me do this. Oh, well, okay.
Oh, that's cool.
So verse 5 through 6. It says this. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among our members. It stains the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. That's an interesting last statement there. And we didn't have time to dig into that in the sermon. What do you make of that? I'm putting you on the spot here.
The whole body sets the course of life on fire and is itself set on fire by hell. So it's talking about the tongue is set on fire by hell, or the whole body?
So, okay, let's break it down. So verse 6, the tongue is a fire, the tongue a world of unrighteousness. So the tongue is a world of unrighteousness. And is placed among our members, meaning the members of our body, and it stains the whole body. sets the course of life on fire. So this fire that is the tongue can turn into a destructive wildfire and set on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. So I don't know. It's appearing to me that there's almost it's almost like he's like getting into sinful nature.
Yeah, like judgment and
that almost like the tongue grasp onto sinful nature in a way that other members of the body don't, like your ears.
Yeah,
like your ears are a more passive thing, where the tongue is an active thing. Your nose. Your nose probably isn't going to get you into too much trouble,
right?
Sin-wise. Your tongue, though, will.
Right.
Your tongue, though, is an active agent, where the other senses are more passive, receptive agents. Maybe that's what he's getting at there, is that the tongue latches onto sinful nature in a way that the other members of the body don't. And so and is itself set on fire by hell? That's an interesting one. I would be interested to hear more what he means by that. He doesn't really elaborate, but maybe it's almost in the new heaven and new earth, like, not that we won't have tongues, but that we won't be able to latch onto that simple nature in the same way. I don't know.
It could be. So it says, the tongue stains the whole body. So there's I think there's an element of like purity here. And then, what is it that causes us to be impure? What is it what is the evidence of our impurities? Well, it's, the tongue is an evidence, right? We've already talked about, right? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so the tongue is an evidence against us, right? And our sinful nature that causes us to be unclean, right? Which that could be is itself set on fire by hell. So I think it's probably in line with what he's trying to say there.
Do you think the Catholics would view this as like a purgatory cleansing thing?
Maybe. I don't know.
Because to my knowledge, purgatory is viewed, which Baptists don't believe in, but
right.
The Catholics view purgatory is a cleansing purification process to fully sanctify a person. And so the tongue itself in this passage is unrighteous and sets the whole body on fire. And maybe under their view, they would say that the tongue, through the purging fire of purgatory, would be cleansed.
Yes. I was going to look at a commentary real quick and see what it says.
We're diving into the deep end on this part.
Tongue. The entire course of life likely means the ups and downs of life. The tongue turns upside down every aspect of life in the community as well as in the individual, set on fire by hell. Evil speech destroys because it comes from Satan himself. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we already talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, I like that makes sense. So, like in the garden, one of the things that Adam and Eve do is rather than obey and submit to God, they obey and submit to the serpent, right? So they function under the authority of the serpent, where they were supposed to exercise authority in the garden over everything else. Mm-hmm. So they fail to do that, and so being set under the authority of Satan ever since, even it would it makes sense that it's like Jesus said to the Pharisees, right, and the scribes that came and asked him, and they're like, "Hey, we have Abraham as our father," and he's like, "You're of your father, the devil." Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's not a similar thought process and a similar thread that, just like Satan is a deceiver and used his tongue to deceive, if our tongues aren't similar, right, or sure, in the same vein or of the same nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's interesting. I think the final conclusion would be the tongue will lead you astray, and if you allow it to, it's going to lead you to destruction.
Yeah. I'd even say go a step farther and say that's how we start, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like that's how it starts.
Yeah.
And so...
the tongue... Well, yeah, because, I mean, so like the verse right after that.
Yeah.
So verse 7 it says, every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish is tamed and has been tamed by humankind, but no one can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. And so the tongue basically is just this wild animal.
Yeah.
That latches onto our sinful nature in a unique way by default. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
and it has to be tamed.
One of my funny, maybe I should mention this. I remember Lottie when she was younger. I don't know, 2. She was 1 or 2. She's just starting to learn words. And I remember one of the first words that she learned was no.
Oh, yeah.
And we were driving down the road, and she was in her car seat in the back, and I could just hear her going, no, no, no. Like she was practicing how to say no. And I was like, this is a perfect example of simple nature right there. She's just gearing up, ready to go to say no.
Absolutely.
Anyways, all right, that's enough of that. The whole point of this part that I lean into is that the tongue is a fire. And the fire is a good thing when controlled, right? When tamed, a fire can be a great thing. It's one of the greatest discoveries, if you will, of mankind, because it's allowed us to harness it and do whatever. Unharnessed, though, it leads to great destruction. Yeah. And so in the same way, Proverbs puts it this way, that the words hold the power of life or death, and that our words in its proper context can be an encouraging, uplifting, life-giving thing to someone else, but in its wrong context can destroy people, like literally lead people to taking their lives. Yeah. Right?
It's happened before.
Happened many times before. Mm-hmm. And so it's just being careful with your words and how you talk about people.
Or like you said, words have led to wars. Before even. And
I went to look up, I just didn't have time to like dig too deep into that, but to look up like what are some prominent wars that were started based on just a disagreement in words is much less about politics and whatnot. Is much more about just a personal vendetta because someone said something about the other.
There's been plenty.
Yeah.
There was an exchange. Oh, gosh. It was with the investiture controversy, and I'm blanking on the date. This is like the medieval period. And there was, oh, gosh. It was one of the popes, Gregory, the 8th, maybe. Oh, my gosh. I should know this. With the Holy Roman Emperor. And basically they're exchanging letters back and forth to each other. So at the time what was happening was the church claimed that it had the sole authority to like basically vest bishops and priests with like the symbols of office, right? It's an authority thing. The state also claimed the same authority, right? The state, the advantage is obvious, right? If you have control over the church, then you can remove a priest or a bishop that you don't like that says something that you don't appreciate. And so what ends up happening is the two start exchanging letters, and so one of the insults that the Holy Roman Emperor threw back at the Pope at the time was to Hildebrand, false monk, not Pope, or something like that. And it's like anyway, the Pope ends up winning. Spoiler, but there was this is after the whole thing blows up. Right, really over words and exchanged letters that they still have. It's very interesting for sure.
Nice. Yeah. So words do affect others. I went back and forth on the title of this point. Our words affect those who hear them. because our words can affect people even if they don't hear them. Even if they don't hear the words, it can still affect them. Gossip, the large portion of gossip, they don't hear the gossip, but it can still affect them. But I went with hear because gossip doesn't just affect the person that it's aimed at, which was one of the other ones I was going to go with. Our words affect those who they're aimed at. But gossip affects everyone in the situation. It affects who you're talking about, it affects who you're talking to, and also affects you. It just destroys everyone involved in that. And so that's one caveat to that.
Yeah, I think that's important to remember.
Yeah. Anyways, all right, let's keep going for time's sake. And then last, our words impact how others view the gospel. Actually, how others view God more specifically.
Yes.
Yeah. You got thoughts on this one?
I got lots of thoughts.
Okay.
I like this one. All right. So I'm going to read James 3, 9 through 12. With it, that is the tongue, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. I should have read that. Do you have the CSB up there?
Yeah, no,
okay.
It's close enough.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. I was halfway through and I realized, that doesn't sound like what you said.
No, I think, so yours says fresh and salt water. This says sweet and bitter water.
Yeah, that's what.
Close enough.
Yeah, it was a flag for me. Yeah. So, and this is where I like like that passage in Luke 6 that we read about, the different fruit bearing trees, and are they bearing good fruit or not, or are they bearing any fruit, and those sorts of things. And you wouldn't expect to gather different kinds of fruit from the same tree, or in this case, you don't go to the same pond and then you dip in a cup on this side and a cup right next to it, and it's like, oh, this is salt water. Oh, this is fresh water. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's illogical. It's an inconsistency, right? In the same way, it's inconsistent when we go to church on Sunday and we're singing God's praises, we're worshiping Him through taking in His Word, through prayer and those things, and then we. But earlier in the week, we were gossiping or slandering someone or tearing somebody down in a way we ought not to have done. It's like those are two things that don't exist. It's just as illogical as salt and fresh water coming out of the same little pond.
Well, and I like the reasoning they give. So if you look at verse 9, with the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Another way to say that is in the image of God. And so that's the illogical reasoning for it, is you can't bless God and then curse those who are made in the image of God. That's the illogical rationale in it, is that whenever you curse someone, you're actually cursing the image of God itself. And so it's like, how can you do those two things at the same time? It's like if you're doing that, you either have a misconception of who you're talking about, that this is a person made in the image of God, they have value, they have worth, and whenever you're talking down to them, bad about them, tearing them down, you're actually tearing down in a sense, the name of God Himself.
Yep, which makes no sense.
Yep.
And then that begs the question, okay, if you're blessing God out of one side of your mouth, out of the other side, you're cursing someone who's made in God's image. Is that as you bless God, is that worship that's acceptable to God? It's like, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, if I was to compare it to what Jesus said, He said that if you have an issue with your brother, leave your sacrifice at the altar or your gift at the altar or whatever. Go settle that first and then come back. And so to an extent, yes, it does hinder your worship, because there's something going on. It's like you've mentioned before, when your kids get into a fight, it doesn't just affect their relationship with each other, it affects their relationship with you. And it's to get your relationship back to 100%, they actually need to get their relationship back to 100%.
Yeah, exactly. And And then it's like, y'all are brother and sister. Like, y'all should be getting along.
In theory.
Don't treat each other this way. Yeah, exactly. It's like all of us being made in God's image, it's like we're on the same level here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's not like there's like a hierarchy,
mm-hmm.
right? Of, I'm more made in the image of God than you are.
Yeah, well, it's God.
From
Gossip,
creation, anyway. Yeah.
Some people struggle with gossip more than others.
Mm-hmm.
However, everyone struggles with gossip.
Yeah.
To some extent. Everyone. Even if you don't verbalize it, everyone struggles with the concept of thinking that they're better
mm-hmm.
than other people and degrading other people. Even if it's people that you don't know. You may be a person that you're very nice to all the people that you know, but man, mentally or verbally or in your typing, you trash those in political office.
Mm-hmm.
To some extent, every single person struggles with thinking that they're better than others and putting down others in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you really break it down, like that's pretty bad. It reveals like a pretty dark part of our hearts,
mm-hmm.
That there's something in us that gets satisfaction out of degrading other people and at the same time elevating ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah, it's dark. Like you said.
Yeah. There's a dark nature to it, and there's a destructive nature to it. I remember I had some friends in college, and they were these ones that like I felt like every time I was around them is just nothing but just negativity and just talking about other people. Like that was like, who are we talking about today?
Yeah.
Like it was kind of the thought. And I realized after a while, man, this is like, I don't like this. I don't like the way this makes me feel. Like I feel gross every time I leave these conversations. And so one of the things I had to do is just literally leave the conversation. Like I had to take a break for a while and just kind of reset myself. And Jonathan McCluda, some people ask him, how, when I'm talking about someone, how do I make sure that I don't cross over into a gossip territory? And he said a good rule of thumb is to only talk about people who are in the room with you. And then that kind of gives you like a good guideline, that you don't cross over into things. Now, obviously, there's going to be times you're going to talk about people that aren't in the room with you, not necessarily in a negative way. It's just life.
Right.
But
you kind of have to.
Yeah, you kind of have to. But that kind of gives you at least like some kind of guideline. Maybe a good way to think about it is like, would I say this if they were in the room with me?
Right.
Both in the positive or the negative. I am not a words of affirmation kind of guy. And so that leads me, I get uncomfortable with words of affirmation. My wife hates it. But what that can lead me to do is I will speak positively about someone more if they're not in the room with me than if they are in the room with me. And so it kind of goes both ways of like, if you ask the question of like, would I say this if they're in the room with me? If it's something negative, then I probably shouldn't say it. If it's something positive and the answer's still no, then that may be like, maybe I should start being more encouraging with my words on the positive side of it. Anyways.
Yes. Yep. It's an interesting way of thinking about it for sure. But, so that was kind of a side note. That was my thoughts on the James 3. I know you took it more of a, like our words can either help to witness to people and to bring people closer to God or to push them away, which is also that happens.
The way I took it is more like what's a byproduct of what's going on in this passage. The core of what's going on in this passage is that there's a inconsistency within the person's life. A byproduct is, what are people thinking when they see this?
Right.
How are non-Christians and Christians responding to this when they see this inconsistency coming out of a Christian's life? And usually it's, I don't want anything to do with that.
Oh yeah. And unbelievers are very good at sniffing those out. Like it's not like, oh well, I love God so much, and then like 10 minutes later, slandering somebody or just flat, like belly aching and complaining about whatever is going on, and just, going all after whatever the situation might be that you're complaining about, or the person who, at the very least is perceived to have brought on this situation. And, I've been there. I've been in the room when that happens with people, and it's just like, we were doing so good, and then it just went downhill so fast.
Yeah. Well, even outside of even slander and gossip, Christians should be the most optimistic people on the planet.
Right. We have good reason to be optimistic.
Yeah. And there are so many times in my life I have not carried optimism, and that would present a confusing message to someone who is not a Christian. That on one hand, you have the peace and hope and joy of Christ, yet on the other hand, you always seem like life is just falling apart. And so we see Paul's like such a great example of this, whose life constantly was falling apart, legitimately falling apart. And yet, in the midst of all this falling apart, had such tremendous optimism about life. And that's something that we would do well to mimic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
So and then you kind of wrapped it up with a question, right? Are our words bringing life or death? Are my words bringing people to Christ or turning them away? It's like evaluate. Think about it. Read the book that your mouth is writing this week, and then adjust accordingly.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go and move on. For time's sake, you've got a bad doctrine for us that we'll get into. But yeah, words matter. They matter because they reveal your heart. They matter because they affect those who hear them, and they matter because they affect or impact how others view God. All right, let's get into our bad doctrine of the week.
It's the bad doctrine of the week.
Okay, our internet is down, so we don't have a video, but you said that you have
It's a Twitter post.
A Twitter post, all right.
I saw.
Tell us about this Twitter post.
Yeah, so I saw it.
Post.
Yeah, I saw it out in the wild, and was I read it, and I'm like, wow, that's actually a pretty loaded statement, and it reflects some skewed ideas and doctrine. So this is from Andrew Tate.
Okay.
Yeah. You're like, oh man, here we go.
I've got so many thoughts on Andrew Tate, but
lots of thoughts. So let me go on and read it, and then we can unpack it. He tweets out February 16th, 25, if all your children come from one woman, you are not a conqueror.
This is actually timely because our young adults, we were talking about polygamy and whatnot. We weren't encouraging polygamy, by the way, but that concept came up.
Yeah. I mean, in and of itself, I don't know if you thought about this, but these are words.
These are words in written form.
Yeah.
But they are words. Okay. If all your children come from one woman, you are not a conqueror. This is like one of the things I don't like about Andrew Tate. So Andrew Tate almost,
among many, but
and if you don't know who Andrew Tate is, go look him up. He's kind of like fallen out of prominence because, so he used to be a kickboxer, right?
Something
or MMA fighter or something. And then I don't know, probably 2020 or so, maybe a little earlier, he started to like really become prominent in the kind of alpha male, manly macho. I don't like this term, but if this term fits anyone, it fits him. The toxic masculinity term. If it fits anyone, it fits Andrew Tate, because he kind of started to promote this like really unbiblical, like
it's kind of a reaction, right?
Yeah, because it was a reaction to manhood is bad, And as a reaction to that, of like, not only manhood is good, but we need to swing the pendulum so far the other way that it pulls us back to times where like women legitimately were oppressed and taken advantage of. And so out of that, he has a viewpoint of almost this old school genealogy that your genealogy and DNA and bloodline is so important that you need to have as many kids with as many women as possible to continue on your bloodline.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's almost like he has like the concubines,
right?
Who their sole purpose is to create children for him. He doesn't care about children. He just cares about his bloodline and his lineage and destiny. And so we get to this verse, we get to this tweet. Thank goodness Andrew Tate did not write a book of the Bible. We get to this tweet where he says, if your children come from one woman, you are not a conqueror. That conqueror there is that ideology of you need to have this great conquering lineage. And the only way to do that is to have 50 women birthing children for you. So that's the backstory of Andrew Tate. What are your thoughts?
I think it's the whole idea that, you have to, and I do understand why, it seemed like for a while there were a lot of younger men that were kind of like latching on to Andrew Tate. Like I think I understand why, because with the whole idea that masculinity is a bad thing, right? And coming back, so like the way that he was popular made sense, right? But this is just a bad idea. Like, again, words matter, and these are not good words to put next to each other to form a sentence, to form meaning. So I actually think the direct opposite is true. So he says, if all your children come from one woman, you are not a conqueror. I very much disagree. I would say that, no, you're more of a conqueror if all of your children come from one woman. And now obviously that needs to be qualified a little bit, right? Like maybe you had 3 kids with your wife and she was killed in a car accident or died of cancer or whatever it was, and you remarried and had more kids. Okay, but it's like that's not what
generally speaking.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I think it's the opposite, really. And if so I think there's always the temptation to the grass is always greener on the other side kind of a thing, and I'm tired of this wife with these kids, so let's get divorced. I'm gonna go get another one, and we'll have more kids over here. So I think committing, right, which is what marriage is, right, is a covenant and a commitment. I think that commitment and staying in that covenant and commitment to be faithful to your wife, to raise your kids up in the Lord, is a conquering. There's a conquering element there.
Yeah, and it kind of depends on what's the definition of conquering, and what are we conquering?
Right.
So according to his tweet, whenever you have children with multiple women, you're conquering the world. Yeah. Right? Like that's the goal, is to conquer the world, whatever that means.
It's like Napoleon. It kind of reminds me of Napoleon. Yeah. He's really he's just a small guy.
Yeah.
But
where Christians have a completely flipped concept of what we believe conquering to be. Our goal is to not conquer the world. Christ will do that, not us. Our goal is to not conquer the world. Our goal is to conquer through the Spirit our sinful nature.
Right.
And so I find it funny, and I'm pretty sure he references this, but the broader ideology that he represents basically says if like men are like bees, right? Our job is to not pollinate one flower, but to pollinate multiple flowers and whatnot, to spread our seed, whatever, blah, 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 all that junk. And our most natural inclination is to procreate with multiple women, and so we should lean into that, and that marriage is archaic and unnatural and against all that, as if all we are just animals, right? And that's what makes mankind different than any other thing. Like, we don't operate on, or we have the capability to not operate on pure instinct,
right?
We have the capability to reason and to have consciences, to struggle with morality, to struggle with what we're ought to do, not what we're want to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think the Bible would say our sinful nature is our instincts, mm-hmm. right? What we are inclined to do is our sinful nature. So when we're inclined to procreate with multiple women, that's our sinful nature leading us to want to do whatever we want to do. But our conscience, and through, if you place faith in Jesus and have the Holy Spirit, we now go contrary to our sinful nature, and we are conquerors over our sinful nature. And so, when we stick with one woman, mm-hmm. Marry that woman, produce children, be faithful to those children, to that family. Yeah, we are conquerors, not over the world, but we're conquerors over ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're not slaves to what we want to do. Yeah. We're conquering over that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and then even kids, children are heritage from the Lord, and arrows in your quiver. Mm-hmm. And so... but that's really only the case whenever, like, we are pouring into them, when we're raising them up in the Lord. And so, I think primarily I like the, hey, let's conquer the sin in our lives. But at the same time, like, our homes with our kids are our primary place where we do get to exert the most influence ultimately over the world, because we're sending them out into the world, right? Mm-hmm. Eventually, when they grow.
And you actually legitimately had a part in that, right? Where, like, let's say this case, or Nick Cannon, what was he, have like 12 kids and he doesn't even know them?
Yeah. Does that count as gossip?
No, those are facts. Yeah. Those are facts.
Well, it's funny because he came to mind, like, immediately when I read this a while back, and so I thought about saying something, but I'm like, oh no, he's not in the room.
Yeah. So well, those are, neither is Andrew Tate.
No, that's true.
These are words these guys put out into the world. We're not speculating when we're talking about this.
Yeah, I'm just messing with you, man. Yeah.
He legitimately has a lot of kids that he himself says he doesn't know.
Yeah. He's not shy about it.
Yeah. And so it's like the case. So, like, let's say the conquering thing. Let's say Andrew Tate has 50 kids. I don't know how many kids he has, but just for hypothetical, let's say he has 50 kids. And let's say one of those kids goes on to be like the great conqueror of whatever.
The next Genghis Khan.
Yeah. Like, how much pride can you really have in that? Like, if you don't even know who that kid is, like, yeah, it's your lineage, but you don't know them. You didn't raise them, assuming. You didn't raise them. You didn't pour into them. They're not who they are because of you.
Right.
They're who they are because of the experiences they had in life, or whatever. And so even in that sense, like, to me, it's hard to, like, think of, like, how much pride can you actually take in being a part of that.
Yeah.
Short of the procreation part.
Right.
Anyways, lots more to be said. Andrew Tate, I'm surprised he's still out. He actually got convicted for human trafficking, right? And not a great guy. It's amazing to me that anyone even still listens to him. But all that being said. Yeah. All right. Well, any other final thoughts?
No, I thought it was a good one. I thought it was fun to talk about, and even to, mess with you a little at the end here.
Yeah. I've got some wild bad doctrines of the week coming up that are just hanging in the thing. I just couldn't access them today. Yeah. Anyways,
we need the internet back.
Yes, the internet back. Thank y'all for tuning in. Tune back in next week for our next episode of the Digging Deeper podcast.